Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on acknowledging and reinforcing expected behaviors. I'm Dr. Bob Putnam from the May Institute, and have been part of the National Technical Assistance Center for 19 years and been doing PBIS for probably 25 years. And have supported a lot of different schools, and I think this topic is one of the more important topics in terms of effective Tier 1 system, Tier 2 and Tier 3, for both students and staff. And I'm with Dr. Stephanie St. Joseph, who really is going to lead the webinar. And she graduated from the University of Oregon with her PhD under the tutelage of Kent McIntosh. I'm sure most of you know who Kent is. And she is a clinical consultant at the May Institute and supports a lot of different schools and districts around the implementation of PBIS. So Stephanie, you got control of the slides, right?
Yes, sir.
So do you want to add anything more, Stephanie?
No, I think you got it. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having us. All right. We are going to start off with a little activity. The directions to log in to Pull Everywhere is right here at the top. You can either type this into your web browser or you can text this. And it'll take you just a minute to log in and put your name in. We're not looking at the names, though. It's all anonymous. And then this is just an open answer question asking you, how do you prefer to be acknowledged? I think acknowledgement and reinforcement and rewards are all things that really feel good for us. I don't think any of us receive it as much as we would like, and we could all do a little bit better with giving it to other people. I know that is something I'm very cognizant about. And so I just kind of want to start thinking about acknowledgement, rewards, reinforcement, and just start typing in how you prefer to be acknowledged. And I will give you about a minute to log in. Words of affirmation, that must be your love language too. Thank you. And then once you start texting them or typing them in, they should start appearing on the screen. So I'm going to provide some specific praise to whoever wrote that. You logged in correctly. Thank you for responding. Bob, how do you prefer to be acknowledged?
I think words of affirmation is great. Access to preferred activities might be another thing that I would like. But those probably are, all of us would like to have a raise, but that doesn't happen when we work oftentimes in human service organizations. But, would be other ways along those lines. So
I often reward myself with good food.
Yeah. And oftentimes you may have been, I've had the experience with a boss who basically I could do 99 things right and one thing wrong. And he would catch me in terms of the one thing wrong in terms of that. So the question is, in some ways, what's the frequency of like words of affirmation? We talk about kids like 4 to 5 to 1. We try to figure out the same thing when we support staff and try to teach our schools in terms of, look at your ratio of providing some type of words of affirmation or other things along those lines within your school for your staff.
Yeah, thankfully, my current boss is pretty good at acknowledging good work. So thanks, Bob. Thanks for acknowledging me for good work and not being like the boss you just talked about. I'm just going to continue going forward just for the sake of time. I don't want to waste anyone's time. I really just wanted you to start thinking about acknowledgement and how you prefer it to make this, everything that we were talking about, a little more meaningful to you. Oh, here we go. Now they're coming up. Oops. Sorry, my computer just being a little silly. Regular opportunities to check in about positive actions, private acknowledgement, all of those fun things. Thank you, everyone, for putting those in there. So why are we talking about acknowledgement? Acknowledgement is, we know, one of the critical components of PBIS. It's a tool for staff to really help motivate students. We want to really work on improving relationships, because that will improve school climate and student self-esteem, a sense of trust. And we know that relationships are important for many reasons. It's important to students being successful in school. It's a predictor of dropout. It creates a positive environment that helps students with recovering from trauma, wanting to attend school, even reducing their anxiety, which is huge for many of our students. And it also improves the frequency of behaviors. So we definitely want to be sure that we're acknowledging and reinforcing and rewarding the behaviors that we want to see, because we know that this really is effective at increasing the frequency.
So one of the things, Stephanie, it would be great to know kind of if you work in the classroom level, or if you work at the school level, or you work at the district level, or you work at the state level. We can see all your names, which is cool. But if you just want to put into chat, if they can kind of work, at what level do you work in education? And Stephanie, you can keep going while we're going. That's okay. Yeah.
Okay. We definitely want to, before going forward, explain the difference between rewards, reinforcement, and acknowledgement. A lot of these terms are used interchangeably, and in some cases that's fine, but in some cases it's not. So just to really be clear, reinforcement is the process of delivering something preferred after a behavior that increases the probability of that behavior occurring again. So it's a consequence that is rewarding. It is important to note that a reward is something given that may or may not increase the likelihood of that behavior occurring again. So there's a reward versus a reinforcement, which is actually a process that increases that behavior occurrence. And acknowledgement is defined as the recognition of the importance or quality of something. And so in PBIS, we talk about acknowledgement systems, which are systematic processes that we put in place to really have consistency and really good delivery of acknowledgement, rewards, reinforcement, etc.
So, Stephanie, we have a lot of people at the state level that are identifying themselves, another person at the district level, several people at the district level as well. We have one person at the classroom level. And the question is, will we share this presentation? And so this presentation is going to be recorded. It will, Austin, who's our IT supporter, can you just weigh in terms of how this will be shared? Okay, it will be posted, right? If you look in chat, he already put it in, it'll be posted along those lines. So you're welcome to share this with other people that you work with, or with people you supervise. Hopefully this is worthwhile. We're going to give you some tools that you can use as well. So, and we'll have plenty of time at the end or through the presentation. I'll kind of monitor the chat to answer any of your questions. So, and we like questions. So hopefully if you have questions, feel free to jump in.
Yes. All questions are referred to Bob Putnam.
Okay.
I'm just kidding. Okay. So when we're considering PBIS, there are the 10 getting started steps, especially for Tier 1. And we are focused on step number 6, which is developing a continuum to strengthen appropriate behaviors. I think it was very, what's the word I'm looking for? It was very intentional that this came before discouraging violation of expectations. That positive of PBIS, we really want to acknowledge and recognize appropriate behaviors that we're seeing. And all of these are based off of the expectations that have been developed previously. All of these pieces are going to work together. We also want to note that a formal acknowledgement system is a key predictor of reduced disproportionality. We know that equity is centered in everything we do in PBIS, and that holds true for the acknowledgement systems.
So if I can just, I think the other piece in terms of that is both the student acknowledgement systems and the staff acknowledgement systems. When we work with our schools, we really emphasize as much in terms of the student acknowledgement system is how you're going to acknowledge staff, because from my perspective of being in this field many years, and my wife was a teacher for 38 years, educators have a really hard job and they don't really get acknowledged in some cases. And when you look at it in terms of what's the press, it's all about beating up educational staff. So one of our goals is really to look at in terms of improving teacher wellness. And one way we can improve teacher wellness is trying to figure out a good acknowledgement system relative to that. So that's why we really think this is really important.
Yeah, and if this was 1 week earlier, we would have been presenting during Teacher Appreciation Week, which is acknowledging all of the good work that our educators do. But 1 month towards the end of the school year is not enough by far. And so we'll talk about how to increase that so it's continuous throughout the year, because we definitely want to thank our educators for all the amazing, amazing work that they do. So the benefits of an acknowledgement system is that, one, it creates positive student to teacher interactions. It also clarifies the expectations for appropriate behaviors. So we've created our expectations, we've gotten student and family input and staff input. We have taught the expectations to our students. And now one way that we're helping them to really learn the expectations beyond those lessons plans is to acknowledge when they are meeting the expectations that we have developed. It increases the likelihood that desired behaviors will be repeated by letting students know what they are doing right. It's also a way to model for other students who may not be doing what's right, letting them see what is expected and right. And it finally reduces the need for engaging in time-consuming disciplinary measures. One of Bob's questions that he asks almost at every training we give is, how much of you have extra time? And we never get a hand raise. Is that correct, Bob?
Actually, one training I did, and it was working in an alternative program, and I knew the alternative program director very well. And it was George in the back. And after the training, he came up to me and said, well, George is a student counselor and none of the staff like George and none of the kids like George. So George does not get a lot of referrals. So it's always nice. And when I've done it, that's the only time in my career that actually anyone's raised a hand and said they had extra time. So, and I know that's not the case with you guys, right? You're very valuable contributors in terms of, and I know you're working like crazy, particularly all of us have worked like crazy during the pandemic. So, and just another thing in terms of, one of the strategies in terms of, instead of just gauging in discipline, is Stephanie pointed out, is just reinforcing sometimes a student next to the student who may be having problematic behavior, which basically may change the student's behavior. So we don't have to engage in error corrections. So that's just another kind of strategy along those lines.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to note too is, while this slide is very student-based for reinforcement, you can put teacher or staff in place of this. So benefits of acknowledgement, it just creates positive interactions, lets people know what they're doing right, and reduces any negative feedback or disciplinary measures that are needed, because we know those can take some time. So we know research says that behavior is likely to occur again when it is reinforced. So a student is more likely to engage in a behavior again when they have something desirable following that behavior. So a reward, reinforcement, etc. If a student is given verbal praise for persisting with a difficult assignment, that student is more likely to persist on other difficult assignments. That's exactly what we want to happen. However, if a student is removed from the classroom after refusal to do a difficult assignment, that student will likely act up later when he cannot or will not complete work. And I think that point is very important to determine what a student cannot do versus what a student does not want to do. And I think sometimes we miss that as educators. And so it's very clear to understand why the behavior is happening. And then when we see what we want to see, we're giving specific praise so that behavior will occur again. We need to be intentional about which behaviors are reinforced. We need to be intentional about reinforcing more often as well. So like I was just saying, all behavior serves as a function, usually to get something or to avoid something. And there's a couple fun little cartoons here. We really like this one from Dairy Queen, which says, "Scream until daddy stops the car." So if the children are in the car screaming and dad stops the car, these children have been reinforced for screaming by getting ice cream. Is that something we want to reinforce and increase the behavior of? That's why we need to be intentional. So remember that there is positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. Negative reinforcement also increases the likelihood of behavior happening. So negative reinforcement is like when Bob keeps telling me to send him something and to send him something. And every time I talk to Bob, he's telling me to send him something. To get Bob off my back, if you will, I will send him something. And that is negative reinforcement. I now no longer have Bob pestering me, which he would never do, by the way. See, I am not making fun of you, Bob. I'm being so kind. Yes. And that is negative reinforcement. That is also increasing the likelihood of behavior happening again. Now Bob knows if he wants something done, he just has to pester me about it. Just kidding. So there is positive reinforcement, and negative reinforcement is that escaping or avoiding something from happening. It's giving us relief from something that is currently occurring. We know that praise is one of the most powerful and important types of acknowledgement. So any acknowledgement system that we put in place needs to be paired with specific praise. We know that specific praise is a high leverage teaching practice. And here's a fun little example. You read that whole passage yourself. Way to go. In earning a point for that. We want to also point out that acknowledgement isn't just for doing something correctly. It should be for even the persistence or the effort that goes into a task, because that is something we want to increase the likelihood of is the trying through difficult tasks. We know that as teacher praise rates increase, student outcomes also improve. So that includes student engagement and on-task behavior, which are things we definitely want because it increases academic outcomes. This also decreases disruptive student behavior from students. We need to provide more acknowledgement than corrections. And so we're striving for that 5 acknowledgements versus for every 1 correction that happens. We know that with students with disabilities, this is even higher. It's 9 to 1. And that is something we need to really keep in mind and be intentional about.
So what we see all the time is, I do this all the time. I always acknowledge kids. And one of the things we've done is really look at is actually going in and doing some observations in terms of seeing that, and oftentimes kind of the best we get is 1-to-1 in terms of that acknowledgement. Even though people say, "Well, I do 5-to-1 all the time." What are you telling me? I do this all the time. So, and there's several different applications that are out there that Stephanie's going to share with you that people can track this. They, in some cases, they can do that themselves, or they can have a peer do that, or a behavioral coach help in terms of doing that. But what we've seen is, yeah, don't tell me this. I do this all the time, and you probably have experienced that. And so some of it is actually collecting data in terms of your own performance, or on the other end is having somebody help you out with that. So,
absolutely. Here we go. I love this slide. I love knowing how the brain works and everything like that. So we know that the brain handles positive and negative information very differently. Negative emotions generally involve more thinking, rumination, especially if you have anxiety, you tend to like play that over and over again. While positive information is kind of more like in the moment, it feels good. Therefore, we tend to ruminate more about those unpleasant events, and those negative events wear off more slowly than good ones. And if we're thinking about cognitive behavioral therapy, how we think, how we act, and how we feel, we know that how you feel affects how you act. And this is really important to remember when we're talking about positive and negative information. Most people can take in only one critical comment at a time because it takes so much more processing and time. And this all leads to the point that we really need to increase the positives in order to compensate. Frequent recognition and encouragement is needed to offset the correction. So this is more research about that 5-to-1 that we were just talking about. Why else do we want to increase acknowledgement? We want to increase those interactions and that rapport with our students. Like we said earlier, we know that having positive rapport and relationships with our students is going to have multiple positive effects. Every time any adult acts with any student, it is an instructional moment. So I have had teachers tell me, I don't teach social emotional learning, I teach math. And in which case my response is, you're actually teaching social emotional all day because every interaction is in an instructional moment. This is something to really keep in mind. So we really need to earn time back to teach kids and keep them in the classroom instead of exclusionary discipline practices so that they can continue to learn from us, both academics and those social emotional skills. So establishing the foundations of acknowledgement systems, we need to ensure that all students know how to perform the expectations that we've developed. It's teaching them. It's also providing them reminders and pre-corrections through visuals on the wall. Pre-corrections when we know, for instance, that our students struggle more in transitions. So maybe in the hallway, giving them a pre-correction. Providing them opportunities to use and practice skills and providing performance feedback, which is specific praise and offering tokens or rewards. Again, this is specific to students, but this is just the same for staff as well. Knowing what is expected for staff, giving performance feedback to staff, all of this is the foundation of acknowledgement systems. I love this slide. This is about and what I wanted to say about this too is that 5-to-1 ratio. This comes from research about marriage counseling and couples. And so if couples will praise their partner or give them specific feedback or positive feedback after something, it increases the likelihood. And so this happens in marriage counseling. So PBIS is a way of life, y'all. Like you take this through all aspects of your life because it's human nature, it's behavior. It's not just for students, it's for staff as well. It's for adults. I just find that fascinating.
So just to also weigh in on that, before we had the research in PBS around 5-to-1, going back 20 years ago, we actually borrowed those concepts from John Gottman, who is one of the top marriage experts. And his research showed that couples that had a 5-to-1 ratio, their marriage lasted longer than couples who didn't. He actually, I'm not selling his book, but he has a new book out that for around improving relationships, which goes beyond marriage counseling, which talks about in terms of ways to improve relationships. And so actually I gave it to my son after I read it to help him in terms of improving relationship. So it's John Gottman, and it's published within the last year. You can get it on Amazon.
Can you spell his last name? Because I can't tell what your Boston accent is.
Oh, yes. Well, yeah. I'm sorry. I have a wicked Boston accent. I park the car in Harvard Yard on a regular basis. And it's John Gottman. It's Gottman. And his wife is co-author.
Okay. Thanks, Bob. What the world's greatest managers do differently. This is to help make this more meaningful for all of us adults here. We know that working environments where employees know what's expected, receive recognition each week for good work, and receive encouragement to contribute and improve are signs of the world's greatest managers. I love that this is all about business and work and everything. But I love that 3 of these pieces are specific to PBIS and acknowledgement systems. And so those are the ones that I've highlighted here. And this is just to really reiterate the point of how powerful acknowledgement and recognition and rewards and reinforcement are. The quickest way to change behavior in anyone is to point out what they're doing right. You can improve behavior by 80% just by pointing out what someone is doing correctly. That is powerful stuff. So we have a little activity here regarding school-wide acknowledgement. Here are some things that have been brought up to us in the past before when we talk about acknowledgement. Consider how you would respond to these questions. Is acknowledgement fair to all students? They're in high school. They should know what to do. They don't need to be acknowledged. Acknowledgement is just bribery. Why can't we just tell them when they're doing a good job? You're building a token society. Why are we rewarding them for what they're supposed to do? If we're giving them extrinsic rewards, does that mean that they're losing their intrinsic motivation?
So maybe, Stephanie, we can give them a couple minutes and they could respond in chat. Mm-hmm. Would that work?
Yes, absolutely. I have a note here that you can add this to an action plan. This is if you are working at a school level where you have an action plan for your school. It might just be important to think about these things, but that's only if that's applicable to you. So yes, in the chat, how would you respond to some of these comments? Or have you received these comments before? Or maybe you even have asked these questions yourself. I know I have. We're giving you about 45 more seconds. Thank you, Guadalupe, so much for your response. Sometimes we think students know, but they may not have the same customs or norms that you are used to. Excellent point. So setting expectations and modeling is really important so they do know what to do. Excuse me. Especially after COVID, where students lost 2 years of learning social emotional skills, I don't think we can assume that they know what they're supposed to do anymore. Excuse me just a second. Bob, can you take over while I...
Sure. So one of the things I would ask is, have you run into these kind of responses in terms of if you've talked to people about acknowledgement systems? Is this just something Stephanie and I have basically heard or responded to, or are these some of the same things that you have responded to? Or maybe we left something out that you could say, no, I haven't really heard this, but I've heard this in terms of,
Thank you, Bob. I'm sorry. I had a little tickle on my throat.
That's okay. So let me give you also a little story in terms of like intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. And I did some consultation up in Vermont in Alfie Coyne, who is one of the folks who has basically written that we shouldn't use extrinsic motivation. It all should be intrinsic. And so I had a principal who was a disciple of him. And when we talked about building an acknowledgement system that, that their staff would build, she said, we would never use extrinsic motivation in our school. We focus on intrinsic motivation. I walked through the school, and like the teachers were, had token systems and all kinds of different things that they were using in their classrooms, which I thought was awesome. And so we went through tier 1, and we then began to work on tier 2, right? Without an acknowledgement system, because she didn't believe in that. And so they had about 50 kids who needed tier 2 interventions. And I said to her, I think if you had some type of acknowledgement system, you might have 25 less kids who needed tier 2 services. But really, it's up to you to decide what you need to follow your values. I'm just trying to figure out a way that, you, since you don't have any extra time and resources, that you can reduce the number of kids who need tier 2 services. So she changed her mind, and she began to look at in terms of developing an acknowledgement system, and she reduced the number of kids who needed tier 2 services. So some of it is kind of what's the best way, as Stephanie pointed out, like can't do or won't do. The goal is we want to make sure that we provide another tool for our staff to be able to reinforce those kids who, may make a choice in terms of, do I want to do this or not? And with some acknowledgement system, they may engage in the appropriate behaviors. So,
yeah, and we'll address all of these points throughout the rest of the presentation. So thank you to those who responded and participated. It's very much appreciated. Oh, here we go. So key features of acknowledgement systems. We want acknowledgement systems to be relevant, which means that they're tied to the school-wide expectations. We want them to be age appropriate and culturally relevant. What Guadalupe just said in the chat was talking about being culturally relevant. And how we do that is to get feedback from the students, the staff, and the families. We want there to be varied types of acknowledgements so that we can make things accessible to all students, no matter how diverse they are. Some students are going to want things that are more tangible, some want more privilege, etc. And then we also want to allow for choice, at least in some parts of the system. By giving our students choice, we're also giving them feelings of control and worthiness, and that they are important. We want acknowledgement systems to also be efficiently delivered, so they fit into daily activities and avoids interrupting instructional time. They need to be easy to teach and to implement. So I was at a school last week where they were talking about acknowledgement systems, and they gave out tickets that could be used at a school store. They had a raffle every month. They had a character of the month. They had like 4 or 5 different acknowledgement systems, which I love and I appreciate. But the problem is that they were doing so much, it wasn't sustainable. And so I brought up the point that maybe they needed to streamline a little bit, and the teachers in the room were very appreciative of that point. It wasn't really fitting into their daily activities. It was taking a lot of effort to really be on top of this. And so that's not what we want to do. We want it to be efficient yet effective. So having predictable and a dense schedule as well will allow for all students to be eligible to earn acknowledgements daily. Again, we're considering equity and diversity and disproportionality here. So having that schedule be layered. So there's daily reinforcements, there's weekly reinforcements, there's monthly, quarterly, etc. And we want it to be available to both students and staff. Our staff is so important. It's going to be harder for them to want to acknowledge good behavior if they're not feeling so great themselves. So we definitely want to be sure we're acknowledging them as well for multiple reasons. So when we're talking about our schedule of reinforcement, there's different schedules that we have listed here. There's high frequency, which is provided daily and is predictable. And examples include that specific praise, which is really just off the cuff. Thank you, Bob, for answering my question. I really appreciate your effort. Providing tickets or notes for being caught being good, coupons to the school store, or even daily announcements, calling out a student's name for those students that love that attention, etc. Intermittent is provided less often. It's weekly, quarterly, or monthly. Usually we think of students of the month or class pizza party for hitting a specific goal, or recognition at a school assembly. Honor roll, for example, citizen of the month, for example. And then long-term just happens a few times a year and tends to involve groups of students. So a whole school pajama day, having an honors banquet, a freshman class picnic, etc. So reinforcement is the relationship between a behavior and a preferred item or activity. So there's two primary ways to teach reinforcement, which is to tell students about them and then expose them. For many students, explaining that you will reward certain behaviors is enough for them. That's the 80% of our tier 1 students. But for other students, we may need to set up situations to help them earn the preferred item or activity. This is part of being equitable. We want to be sure that all students are getting opportunities. So we may have to set some up so that they can learn what earns them acknowledgement or reinforcement and how that feels. The use of visual cues and reminders can support the student. And we need to really keep in mind that all students need to learn a reinforcer at some point to show them that relationship exists. And here's something about how we select rewards because they may or may not actually reinforce a behavior. Just because we think students may prefer something doesn't mean that it's effective for them. The best way to determine whether something is reinforcing or increasing the behavior is by collecting data on that behavior. I'm a nerd. I love data. This is telling me what I'm doing correctly, what's working and not working. And whenever possible, involving students in selection of rewards will help make sure that it is a reinforcement. So asking them their preferences, getting their voice, what do you want to work for? What would be something that you want to do? In the alternative school, we're trying to improve attendance. So I asked students, what do you want as a prize? And so we found from their input that they all wanted a field trip to Boston. And so that began a reward that we were working towards. It's important to remember, though, that student preferences change over time. So we want to be sure to frequently reassess those preferences, especially if the data is showing us that our system is not being effective. Continuation of reinforcement is also important. One thing that happens is at the beginning of the school year, we're reviewing our expectations, we're reviewing our rules over and over, and then we kind of step away from that. And the same thing happens with reinforcement. It tends to be very front heavy. So we're doing a lot of reinforcement at the beginning, and then we're thinking that things are working, so we don't need to do it as often. So when we withhold that reinforcement, it's called extinction. And when this happens, we can have two unwanted effects, which means that the behavior may decrease or stop, or inappropriate behavior may reemerge. We need to offset these effects by slowly introducing intermittent reinforcement. So instead of that dense reinforcement happens every day, we're fading it a little more slowly. We want to develop systems that monitor ongoing reinforcement to help pre-correct for lapses in recognizing student behavior. So there are several apps out there. One of them that we'll talk about a little bit more is called B+, which kind of sets off a timer for you. So if you have your phone in your pocket, it'll buzz to remind you that, you need to provide that reinforcement at some point. I think it's something we tend to forget about because we're doing so many other things. So doing that little timer can really help us. You can also set it up so that for students who may not receive as much reinforcement, it's giving us a reminder of those students who haven't received as much, so we know to focus on them to provide that reinforcement. When we talk about reinforcement, like I was saying before, maybe streamlining all the systems, we want to make sure that our acknowledgement systems are sustainable. So here's a little chart that provides some questions to think about when you're developing your acknowledgement system. Think about who your intended audience is. How broadly do you need to assess and plan for the reinforcements and the preferences? And how are you collecting data about how it's working? We also want to make sure that things are cost effective. A lot of times we think about tangible rewards, which can be very expensive, but we also know that many of our students prefer privileges or attention, which do not cost anything. I had one school, the students earned the opportunity to duct tape the principal to a locker that doesn't cost anything besides the duct tape, and the students were so excited by it. So we have to be a little bit creative about these things, and we'll get into that a little bit more as well. There is a book by Laura Riffle, and this is how she organizes different rewards through the PELPATES acronym: privileges, attention, leadership, praise, assistance, touch, escape, and supplies. And there's so many examples in this book that are very beneficial. And here's a little plug. There is an upcoming brief from PBIS, from the PBIS Center, that will also organize different rewards and reinforcement by function of behavior. So keep your eyes out for that.
And if you want to send us your email, we'll give you a prompt when that comes out, because it's in process and we expect it out in probably the next several months. But if you want to have us send you an email to let you know it's out, then let us know.
Yes, thank you for saying that, Bob. I forgot about that. If you also go to pbis.org, there is the Teach by Design blog, in which there is a really great blog about 5 ways to reward students the right way. PBIS apps has, or the center even has briefs about acknowledgement, but some of these blogs, they're much more readable and friendly. So if this is something you might want to share with your staff, that's something to think about. So the link is here. When we're talking about acknowledgement systems, we keep saying this. We tend to think about acknowledging our students, so from staff to students, but we also want to consider staff to staff acknowledgement. And this isn't just even administrators, it's staff to staff. It's, hey, Bob, thank you so much for helping me with that email last week. I really appreciate it. Just a little shout out for him. But also think about student to staff reinforcement or acknowledgement systems. So creating ways for students to share appreciation for staff. So I've done this in a school, and it was really interesting when we started to talk about this. Staff was really nervous about the type of feedback that was coming back in. And there was one teacher in particular that said, I am very strict with my students. They know they can't get away with anything. I'm not going to receive any acknowledgement. But the exact opposite happened. They actually received more acknowledgement, and the students were saying things that, such as they really appreciated that there was a routine in that classroom and there was consistency and they knew what to expect and they knew what they had to do. So that was very, very powerful for the specific staff.
And there's a study out there published many, many years ago where a school counselor took some of the behavior problem, kids with behavior problem kids, and set up a social skills group. And unbeknownst to the teachers, the social skills group was to teach the students how to reinforce their staff, their teachers. So they did a number of lessons in terms of, they did a number of role playing, never told the teachers what the intervention was. The kids went back in and the teachers said, I can't believe how much better these kids are in terms of behaving in my class. And the only intervention was teaching the kids appropriate ways to acknowledge their teachers. So if somebody is interested, I can try to look up that study. But that, when I presented that study to a variety, when I've had groups of school counselors and mentioned that, their eyes lit up in terms of, wow, that's a pretty cool intervention. And send me that article because I really would like to look at that. So just to reinforce that, staff to student, or student to staff, that sometimes you don't think about that, but that's, and that improves teacher wellness as well. So
exactly. You see the picture here in the middle. This is the custodian for the building. He is holding a golden plunger. So whatever class kept the bathrooms the most clean after their bathroom trip, they would receive the golden plunger. And this was very motivating for classes. And we saw an increase in the cleanliness of the bathroom. These are other examples down here, such as a ticket, an attendance that is posted for everyone to see, and then the Golden Tray Award. This is for the cleanest table in the cafeteria. So there are multiple ways and settings in which to provide reinforcement and increase the behavior that we want to see.
And what we really want to do is move towards self-management. So oftentimes if I talk about this, they're saying, well, the kids are going to get dependent on this. And our goal is really how do we work to use our acknowledgement systems with some sophistication to teach self-management. That's what we really want to work on, so that because, the goal is really to have students be able to complete their work and have their social skills without staff interventions.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And here are more examples of acknowledgement systems. So these are the tickets or the little gotcha, caught being good type things. Oops, I'm sorry about that. So providing staff with tangible ways prompts them to notice students and let students know what they were doing what they were doing correctly, so they will do it again. So you got a like for being responsible or being organized or achieving or being respectful. So these can be collected and entered into a drawing or a raffle for further recognition. And this is also really beneficial if you're collecting these forms or tickets. It's also a way to collect data, which we know is going to be beneficial for us as well. We want to keep it simple. Some of the best acknowledgements are easy and free. So these students got to earn being able to decorate a window pane on the school door. That's awesome. It's no brainer, but the students loved it. What about acknowledgement systems for older students? Research says that adolescents typically need a more intense experience to recognize it as rewarding. We know that adolescents often have that their behavior, they're looking for bigger rewards, and so they have more risk taking. And so with that in mind, we need to provide them more intense acknowledgement and recognition to help them. So we know that there's honorable acknowledgement breakfast and athletic award assemblies, but those are very intermittent. We need to be much more dense in how often we're providing that reinforcement, and then also really being sure that they're earning things. So a ticket we're thinking about the developmental levels of our students as well. A ticket to earn a t-shirt or merchandise is going to be really beneficial. The school has noise celebration, so no out or in-school suspension for students that were doing what they were expected, showcasing art. All of these things are really, really beneficial for adolescents, but it's really important to remember that they need more intense experiences and it needs to fit their developmental abilities and their preferences.
And I have high schools that have, as part of their PBIS team, they have students that really work on student wellness and recognition and really, make the suggestions to the staff in terms of what's meaningful in terms of our students. And that's probably the most important thing, is that you have really student input and not just be staff directed, but it needs to be student directed in terms of the acknowledgement system.
And here's some examples for staff as well. So staff shout outs, just a little sticky wall, a special parking space, even like a cute little pen or something. I know that some staff, especially in elementary schools, if they can get an extra actually all schools getting an extra recess or planning period, so that you have more time to do something, is really beneficial as well. I'm just reading.
Stephanie, we sorry to interrupt. We have a question in the chat.
Okay.
Can you clarify if you have students on the PBS team or if there's a student branch of PBS? So from my perspective, and Stephanie can weigh in, particularly at the high school level, students should be on the PBS team. They should be active participants in terms of developing your PBS plan, in terms of what the expectations would be. Students know in terms of where the problem areas, much better than staff would be in the high school, like this bathroom is a problem area. So from our perspective, if particularly at the high school, kind of less at the middle school, but we think they need to be active participants as well, as basically, particularly at tier 1, that we would want to make sure that the students have as much active involvement as the staff do in terms of developing a tier 1 PBS plan. So,
yes.
And oftentimes we have to remind school teams is where's your student input? in terms of this, that you really need to have student input. Go ahead, Stephanie, I interrupted you again, sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, especially at tier 1, I know people think about, well, what if we're talking about other students? Well, at tier 1, you're not talking about specific students because it's tier 1, it's all students. And so that shouldn't have to be a concern there. And they don't even need to attend all of a meeting or even every meeting, but just making sure they're part of the process is going to be super, super helpful. And is very important to making sure that we're reflecting the culture and community and I just lost what word I'm going to say, the culture of the school.
And we also would expect we have families that are on that tier 1 team, and oftentimes kind of the student input and the family input is kind of missing in terms of what we want. So because this is, as you all know, PBIS is developed by the school. We don't have curriculums that we're giving folks. That basically we have a framework, and the school team with students and family members really work to develop the tier 1 and as well as the other tiers in terms of the interventions and supports.
I will also note that book by Laura Riffel that I mentioned earlier, it's RIFFEL, also has a section for acknowledgments for staff as well. There's also a component about having, when we have our expectations and we create the matrix for what those expectations are in different settings, we can also create a staff matrix if we are seeing that there are problem areas or things happening. It's just, I would be sensitive to making sure that that's not like an evaluative measure type thing. It's just more to be helpful. And we've said most of this, but I really love this first point. Reinforcement systems are related to a 22% increase in workplace performance and morale. Who does not want to improve even more than we can always improve. And so I love that. We won't, if you want to, take 10 seconds to put into chat a way that you think adults are reinforced in everyday life. This is similar to that first question we asked, but which is why I'm only giving us 10 seconds or so. But when this is to answer the point, why do we acknowledge students for what they're supposed to be doing anyways? And it's really someone put something in chat. Credit card rewards. Excellent.
Yes.
You're brilliant. That's exactly what I was going to say. We as adults are rewarded all the time. So through credit card rewards, Kohl's Cash, getting even a Facebook like is a way of having reinforcement, getting discounts and things. Yep. Stars at Starbucks. Yes. Who does not love earning a free Starbucks?
Right.
Guadalupe, watching your steps encourages you to be more active. That is that specific performance feedback that we're talking about that tells you what you need to be doing. So yes, we are rewarded all the time as adults, even though we may not think of it that way. I tend to think of my paycheck. Thanks, Bob, for my paycheck. That's the biggest reward for me for working. But there are other rewards that I give myself throughout the day or through things such as this.
So we have 7 minutes left. All right, just so you.
Perfect. I think that's going to be perfect. And then the point about rewards being dangerous, are we losing our intrinsic motivation, etc.? I love this was a meta-analysis of 150 studies on motivation and rewards, and they found that there is no inherent negative property of reward. The argument against the use of rewards is overgeneralization based on a narrow set of circumstances. And this is a meta-analysis that's looked at so many different studies. And so really think about where you're getting your information, because this is very, very powerful for me. I've heard, I had those concerns as well until I read something like this. And here's where we were talking about getting vested partners, getting the student input and the family input is going to be really beneficial because we want to make sure that what we're putting in place really is reinforcing for our students and that we also are culturally relevant. I said all of this before about developmentally appropriate, culturally relevant, all students have access, being specific, and providing greater attention for the contextually appropriate social skill than for the problem behavior. And we also don't want to remove positive feedback as a threat or a bribe. That's important to remember as well. Don't ever threaten to remove the positive feedback or the reward. We're just really giving those rewards every time we see something. If you go to anypbis.org, there is a link here. There's a repository for all sorts of different acknowledgement systems that schools have put into place here. And then we have more resources, such as the briefs that we have that are in process from the center. So one is for supporting teachers and one is specific for student reinforcement. Those will be coming out in the next couple of months. Again, if you thanks for those that put their email in the chat. When they come out, we can send those forward to you. And here are some more links to acknowledgement systems. So there's PBIS apps. There is the Center on PBIS has a video about equitable classroom acknowledgement systems, management for school-wide success, and then tracking positive reinforcement with the B+ app. So lots of resources in here for you to look at. A couple final notes that we want to talk about. We have mentioned acknowledgement systems that include raffles in school stores. We really wanted to highlight the positives, the advantages and disadvantages of each of these. So school stores can be costly. You have to have the merchandise for the school store, and it can be difficult to operate. Because of that, they tend to not be open every day or even weekly. It might be only once a month. What's good about this is that students can trade tickets, which is immediate positive reinforcement, in for a prize of their choice. So they're getting a couple layers here. They're getting that immediate reinforcement and the ticket that they can then trade in for a prize of their choice. So it's more meaningful to them. Raffles, on the other hand, are quick and easy, and we can hold multiple raffles at once, daily, weekly, monthly, etc. The problem with that is only one winner for a raffle means that reinforcement is sparse. So some students may lose motivation. They'll say, I never win. Why would I try to be a part of that raffle? And so that's important to consider as well. Again, I am available if you guys want to email for more information on school stores and raffles. I'm going to move ahead a little bit just because of time, but we have lots of information and ideas that we can send you if you like. I wanted to make a specific point about equity and acknowledgement systems. Research shows that Black students receive lower rates of praise and higher rates of reprimands. We know this. There's lots of research that indicates this. But we know that if our students are receiving lower rates of praise, then we're not increasing the behaviors that we want to see. However, the other side of this is we know that coaching can increase equity and praise and reprimands. We just have to be very intentional about it. And some of the strategies are listed here. So we want to assess and increase equity and use with our students. So if you have that B+ app, for example, and you know that Jared is struggling more and not receiving as much praise, we're becoming very intentional that we are going to find ways to praise and reward Jared today. We can also increase cultural responsiveness by doing preference assessments. What do these students want to work for so that we know they're being included? And then also having non-contingent acknowledgement just for effort or really finding any reason at all just to say thank you for being here. Greetings at the door are a way to just even recognize our students and build those relationships. And all of these things are going to help really increase the equity that we're doing when we're not even just using acknowledgement systems, but working with our students. So in summary, we know that acknowledging through reinforcements systems is a core component of PBIS. They should be in place for students and staff and go student to student, staff to staff, staff to student, etc. When considering how to implement these systems, we just want you to consider the preferences of your students for what they prefer to obtain, how often they're reinforced, as well as the sustainability of the reinforcement systems that they use. So this was a very brief overview of a lot of information that we have lots more information to share. So be on the lookout for those briefs. Feel free to email me if you want more information. But at this time, I'm going to stop talking and see if there are any questions out there.
And we have 1 minute.
You have 1 minute for questions, or you can email.
Right.
I'll put my email in the chat.
So many of the schools, it's anyone expanding using digital banks instead of paper money. So a number of the schools I've worked with have used class dojo points, particularly during the pandemic when kids were at home. They actually used dojo points and could share those with parents along those lines. So I'm not as tech savvy as somebody. I don't know if that's what you mean by digital banks, but that's ways that people have used a electronic acknowledgement system, and it's free at the basic level, and I think it costs a little bit more in terms of that. And literally, the schools will track dojo points, and they'll track dojo points by classroom to see, are all the students getting reinforced? And one of the things they oftentimes look at in one of the schools I work with, before students are put into tier 2, they actually go in and do an observation and check that the reinforcement levels are appropriate. So students are not going into tier 2 that really just need additional motivation. So somebody, Carolyn said dojo is working really well in one of my middle schools. Yep, that's what we see as well.
I do have a school that the students wear their IDs around their neck on a lanyard. It's for safety reasons. But there's an app that the staff can just scan the student's ID as a way to give them like a digital point or digital money that they can turn into the school store. And so it's really simple. It's just an app. The teacher has their phone on them at all times. And when they catch a student being good, they just scan their ID. And this is really beneficial for things like in the hallway or for specials, so that students are not just being acknowledged by their teacher, by all school staff. It is on PBIS rewards. If you go to PBIS rewards, you'll see where that program is. I've had other schools not even use that program, just kind of create their own QR codes for the students, but it's worked really, really well for them. It's easy. Again, when we're talking about sustainable things that are easy for staff, it's easy for them just to scan the ID and provide points, and they'll provide levels of points. So 1 point is for meeting the expectations, and 3 points for going above and beyond, for example.
So Guadalupe said in CPS, we're not allowed to use dojo anymore. So it really has to fit the culture and the context of your school or district in terms of what you're using. And we've tried to provide you a lot of different ways in terms of doing this. And, hopefully we've given you some ideas. And as Stephanie said, she put her email. We would more than willing to answer any questions that we didn't get, or maybe there's a question, later that you say, oh, gee, I should have raised that. So thank you for participating. Hopefully it was helpful, and this will be up at some point in time on the PBS Center application.
Thank you, everyone.